I'm Liz Cohen. I'm Dean of the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to the annual Robert and Maureen Rothschild Lecture. The Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study is dedicated to fostering inquiry that transcends disciplinary boundaries. It is also uniquely committed to sharing the fruits of advanced study with a broad public audience. The calendar card that you will find on your chairs today lists a number of compelling upcoming events, and I hope you'll join us for some of them. I especially draw your attention to the annual Phelps Lecture in the Creative Arts. It will be held on Monday, October 19th, when current fellow and choreographer Carol Armitage will discuss how dance makes meaning through movement rather than words. I also want you to be among the very first to know about an event coming in April. The Center for African Studies, the American Repertory Theater, the new Harvard undergraduate concentration in theater, dance, and media, and the Radcliffe Institute will collaborate to mount a production of Hear Word, a dramatic commentary on gender and contemporary Nigerian society, written and directed by Nigerian playwright Ifeoma Fafumwa, a play that has never before been performed in the United States. But today, the Rothschild Lecture. For the past 25 years, the Rothschild Lecture has epitomized the deepest purposes of Radcliffe. Harvard alumnus Bob Rothschild and the late Maureen Rothschild, who was a Radcliffe College alumna and trustee, established the Rothschild Lecture at the Schlesinger Library in 1990 in honor of their 50th reunions. It has brought to Radcliffe Yard visionary leaders who straddle the worlds of academia and public life. And it has become one of the key ways that we have advanced the public side of the Schlesinger Library and of Radcliffe. These purposes have mattered deeply to Bob, who is truly a Renaissance man, a business executive, a biographer of an 18th century astronomer, a serious art collector, an accomplished sailor, and a generous university citizen who has a long history of support for Radcliffe. And his partner in this mission has been Radcliffe graduate and Bob's wife, Margaret Toberg Rothschild, whose staunch championship of women's rights has helped keep this lecture series so dynamic. For a quarter of a century, the Rothschilds' generosity has allowed us to learn from leading figures like Anita Hill, Barbara Ehrenreich, Amartya Sen, Gail Collins, and Samantha Power. Bob is not able to be with us here this afternoon for health reasons, but I know that the good vibes will reach him. So please join me in thanking Bob and Margaret for this wonderful gift of an inspiring lecture series. I'm so pleased to have you all here today to mark this milestone with us. And I hope you will stay for a reception immediately following the lecture, which will be held in Fay House directly next door. In addition to the Rothschilds, we are also honored to have with us this evening Radcliffe medalist and former Chief Justice of the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, Margaret Marshall. Today's lecture not only celebrates the 25th anniversary of the Rothschild Lectures, it also marks the first Schlesinger Library event under the leadership of the new Carl and Lily Pforzheimer Foundation Director of the Schlesinger Library, Professor Jane Kamensky. Along with being a prominent historian of early American history, Jane is a Radcliffe veteran in her own right. She was a Radcliffe Institute Fellow in 2006-07 and a Bunting Institute Fellow a decade before that. I look forward eagerly to working with Jane to further develop, diversify, and digitize the library's outstanding collections and to enrich the relationship between the library and the rest of Radcliffe in ways that continue to make the Radcliffe Institute more than the sum of its parts. So welcome, Jane. So it's a very big day here. And for all these reasons, it was even more important than usual to invite an especially inspiring speaker. We wanted someone whose life and work embodied both the spirit of the Rothschild Lecture and the Schlesinger Library's dedication to documenting the multidimensional lives of women, a tall order. In January 2013, I was fortunate to have the opportunity to visit South Africa. I was so profoundly moved by what I learned and saw there that I returned determined that the Radcliffe Institute would play a role in deepening understanding in the United States of this fascinating, complex, and inspiring nation. I learned a lot about Dr. Mamphela Ramphele while in South Africa, and I was delighted to discover upon my return that she and the Radcliffe Institute shared some very good friends, including Margaret Toberg Rothschild and Margaret Marshall, who was born and raised in South Africa. In fact, when Martina Horner was the president of Radcliffe College, Margaret Toberg Rothschild worked to bring Dr. Ramphele to Radcliffe as a Bunting Fellow. A tale of two Margarets, one Martina, and one Mamphela, it was overdetermined that we would invite Dr. Ramphele to speak. She honors us today by sharing her insights into the question, can African women redefine liberation for all? I will turn to Jane to give a full introduction to Dr. Ramphele in just a moment, but before I do, I want to pause for a moment to consider her experience as a Bunting Fellow in 1988-89, when she wrote about place, power, and South African migrant workers. She also used her time here to reflect on the purposes of scholarship, as she explains in her marvelous autobiography. It was here that she began to search for ways to ensure that her academic work would not distract from her political commitments, but rather serve, and I quote her, as a continuation of her previous work as an agent of change, end quote. And she has certainly found ways to do that. As a medical doctor and an anthropologist, she has found the parallels between the participant observer and the activist and the anthropologist. She listens to people in their own voices. She sees the world from perspectives other than her own. She has helped to create an anthropology of South Africa that moves far beyond, in her words, the handmaiden of colonialism, to building much deeper understanding of South African society. And in doing that, she has insisted on the importance of gender alongside race as a fundamental category of analysis. As a change maker and a scholar of change, she has demonstrated the courage to take risks and to rise to what she so beautifully identifies as the enormous challenge to remain human. Let me now welcome to the lectern my new colleague in the Harvard History Department and the Radcliffe Institute, Jane Kamensky, who will give Dr. Ramphele a fuller introduction. Jane.
It's a great honor as the brand new faculty director of the Schlesinger Library to welcome Dr. Mamphela Ramphele back to Radcliffe and to introduce her to you on the auspicious occasion of this afternoon's 25th annual Rothschild Lecture. The Schlesinger is a premier repository of the papers documenting the lives and work of American women, especially the leaders of the more than century-long feminist freedom struggle in the United States. So it seems particularly fitting that we hear this afternoon from one of the most important original voices in the struggle for the liberation of South Africa from apartheid and in the fight for the freedom of African women, battles that Dr. Ramphele has waged for nearly 5 decades and in which she continues to manage the delicate work of breaking boundaries while building bridges. If you have not already read Dr. Ramphele's marvelous autobiography, My Life, A Passion for Freedom, I recommend that you do so immediately after the lecture. The book traces the dawning of a political consciousness that preceded the headlines for which she is well known. She was born in the northern Transvaal in 1947, a year before the apartheid state took its full legal form. Both of her parents were teachers and nurtured the passion for learning that drove Ramphele to complete her medical training at the University of Natal, which was a highly unusual path for a woman of her place and time, let alone a woman of color. Much of the credit for this and subsequent accomplishments goes to Dr. Ramphele's grit. Hers is a story of perseverance in the face of unbelievable obstacles, including law and brute military force. But Ramphele, as she tells her story, embeds her life in a web of lineage as much as individual striving. And particularly important to that web were the generations of strong women who preceded her. Her mother, she writes, faithfully fulfilled her responsibilities as a newly married young woman in the village, but she would not be bullied by anyone. Dr. Ramphele's own biography shows the deep imprint of that maternal legacy and her commitment to passing it on to others. If Dr. Ramphele's life work reminds us that people shape history, it is also a tale of the way that history makes the people who live through it. Hers is in part a story of timing. She writes, historical accidents give rise to major tides which sweep the unwary aside or redirect them into paths that they could not have anticipated. She was not unwary. She entered medical school in 1968, a year of rage and hope and change all over the globe. Along with Stephen Biko and several others, Ramphele was a founding member of the Black Consciousness Movement, the powerful South African strand of the global struggle for freedom of oppressed peoples of color. She recalls herself and Biko and their cohorts staying up at night talking politics, reading Gandhi and listening to the voices of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King on tape. America's civil rights movement infused their struggle against apartheid, just as the South African freedom struggle would reignite campus activism in the United States in the late 1970s and 1980s. For many of those years, Ramphele suffered cruelly under the apartheid regime, detained under the Terrorism Act in the wake of the Soweto uprisings, and then banished to remote Sandton. Yet she managed not only to endure there, but to build, establishing community health programs and other initiatives, especially directed at the empowerment of rural women. As apartheid crumbled, she rose. She furthered her already considerable education, earning advanced degrees in public health and tropical medicine at the University of Witwatersrand. And by the time South Africa held its first democratic elections, in the spring of 1994, she had earned her PhD in social anthropology from the University of Cape Town. Those historical elections took place while she was on sabbatical at Harvard. She cast the first vote of her life beneath the golden dome of Bulfinch's State House here in Boston. In the 2 decades since that historical vote, Dr. Ramphele has deepened her impact in South Africa and extended her reach around the globe. In 1996, she was appointed Vice Chancellor of the University of Cape Town, an attainment she describes as beyond her wildest dreams, and certainly beyond the historical imagination of the world in which she was born and which she helped to change. In the year 2000, she became one of the managing directors of the World Bank, the first South African to hold that position. She has been a force for social justice in the global economy and within the contentious political landscape of the new South Africa. In February 2013, she launched a political party, Akang, dedicated to, quote, true freedom for all, a job, a home, and a life of dignity. She stepped down from her leadership of Akang last year, retiring to the life of an active citizen, although I have a feeling that retirement is probably the softer of those terms and active, the louder. She continues fully to embody the highest promises of global citizenship, not least through the telling of her remarkable story. One had to write history to make history, Dr. Ramphele says, emphasizing in her autobiography the importance of scholars, storytellers, archives, and archivists to the freedom struggle. Quote, storytelling is a historical imperative. We cannot successfully navigate uncharted waters without some script to guide us. This is particularly so for women, she says, especially Black women. Women have to find a script, a narrative to live by, because all other scripts are likely to depict them in roles that fit the conventional stereotypes. There is nothing conventional or stereotypical about the life and work of Dr. Mamphela Ramphele. The title of her talk this afternoon is Can African Women Redefine Liberation for All? She demonstrates in everything she does that the answer emphatically is yes. Dr. Ramphele.
Good afternoon. I can't tell you what an honor it is and what a joy it is to be back here at a place which shaped my engagement in the academic world. At that time, I came as a Bantu scholar, and as already said, Margaret was the moving force behind that. I have to thank Radcliffe for bringing me back and for reminding me of the beauty and the historical importance of now the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Studies. My little encounter with the students during lunchtime today convinces me that you are doing a fabulous job. It is 27 years ago that I was here, and in some ways it feels like yesterday, but a lot has happened still. So I would like to spend the rest of this afternoon exploring with you this question. That is the title of my talk. I'm not so sure about the self-evident parts, but I do believe that we need to ask these tough questions. But to do so, I want us to listen as a starting point to the voice of a 17-year-old African woman. Here's what she said. Navigating a world in which we women fight to be free in thought, in speech, in actions is thrilling, as it is vexing. Yet it is precisely this complex balance between deep hardships and intoxicating victories in becoming a woman that I am realizing an extraordinary power. Through being made to feel threatened, I've come to realize that I am in fact extremely threatened. We women no longer know our place. We women no longer know our place. I want you to hold that in your mind as we go back to sketching the context in which this young woman said these amazing words for a 17-year-old. We live in a world in which knowledge systems, technology, tools, and resources are available to address any major challenge that we face in our global world today. But we seem to lack the wisdom to govern our affairs for the benefit of all citizens. My own country, South Africa, and the continent of Africa are the poster children of the gap between resources and opportunity to succeed on one hand, and the real and lived reality of the indignity of poverty and hopelessness affecting most citizens on the other. This gap reflects the cost of living with old minds and failing to adapt to the new world. South Africa's constitution is the envy of many in the world, but the lived reality of many of its people is still shaped by inequities and human indignities. The triple burden of poverty, unemployment, and inequality weighing heavily on the majority of South Africa's people remains color-coded and gendered. Just over 64% of women are unemployed. And of those employed, few make it to senior positions or to board positions, whether you're looking at the private or the public sector. Pay parity remains unattained at many levels in both public and private sectors. Only 25% of business owners are women, and 42% of entrepreneurs are women. Black African women, the majority population in South Africa and in Africa, bear the brunt of the triple burden of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. Africa is home to 8 of the 10 countries in the world today with the youngest populations. The proportion of those below 25 years averages 67% in my continent. Ironically, Africa is also led by some of the oldest living heads of state, with Uncle Bob, not your Bob, Uncle Bob Mugabe of Zimbabwe leading the pack. Their tenures in office average 10 to 35 years, placing them among the oldest serving heads of states in the world. The disjunction between a youthful population that is majority women being led by old men speaks to the old mindset that needs to be challenged. The question I would like to explore in this talk today is related to this context. Can African women redefine freedom for the benefit of all? If so, what would it take to redefine freedom? How different would such freedom be from the post-colonial and post-apartheid experienced freedom today? What values, what systems, what practices would characterize freedom for all as a lived experience? You may well ask, why focus on African women as change agents? History teaches us that change only comes when those who stand to benefit most stand up and make it happen. The redefinition of freedom is most likely to be done by those who suffer oppression most and are conscious of their agency to bring about change. The persistence of a narrative of freedom that excludes such change agents becomes, in this case, a motivating force. Slavery ended when slaves stood up and challenged their slave masters. Colonialism ended when subjugated people stood up and refused to be treated as second-class citizens in the land of their birth. Apartheid ended when black people, led by young black people, stood up and redefine themselves as free from the label of being non-white, non-European in Africa. Imagine. And we declared ourselves black and free. Post-colonial Africa is underperforming its potential to become a thriving, inclusive, economic, democratic space that leverages the huge resources, whether you're looking at the natural resources, mineral resources, or human resources. This underperformance results from the failure to utilize the talents and capabilities of all of Africa's people, men and women. Africa's narrative of freedom is that of male liberation heroes, claiming leadership of their independent countries as an entitlement and a reward for their contributions to the liberation struggle. Many have failed to make the transition from freedom fighters whose allegiance to the movement takes precedence over everything else. They have failed to become public servants, accountable to all citizens and respectful of their human dignity. It is no accident that these liberation heroes are all male, modeling themselves on male-dominated power elites in the rest of the world. One needs only look at any global gathering. Global leaders are mostly men, with the notable exception of Angela Merkel, the Chancellor in Germany at EU level, President Dilma Rousseff in Brazil at the BRICS level, and the singleton African woman president, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf of Liberia at the AU level. This is the performance of the world we live in. Constitutional guarantees of gender equality and protection of human rights that graze many countries' legal systems have yet to become the lived reality for most African citizens. Gender discrimination, gender-based violence, and abuse conspire to undermine women and children in most countries. The dominant narrative in Africa is that of liberation heroes and their parties being entitled to govern, no, more accurately, entitled to rule in perpetuity. In my country, we've got a president who says, the ANC will rule until Jesus Christ comes. He may just be surprised that Jesus Christ comes sooner than he is prepared. Any criticism of governing parties is regarded as disloyalty to one's liberators and is often heavily punished through socioeconomic marginalization, threats and reality of violence and intimidation. The threat of punishment for disloyalty to the ruling party strikes fear in the hearts of entrepreneurs, professionals, and ordinary people alike. Compliance becomes seen as the only option for many of those who choose to remain in their home countries. Emigration has also come to be seen as an option for those who can go to greener pastures. And this has resulted in Africa being deprived of the skills, the creativity of millions of its citizens due to these marginalizing tendencies of our African governments. We live the stories we tell and are told about ourselves. Africa will remain captive to unaccountable, self-serving political leaders until such time that citizens weave and embrace a new narrative. African women are in a strong position to weave a new narrative. Women's positions as mothers, sisters, aunts, grandmothers, and caregivers puts them in a strategic position to tell stories that shape the lives of the many people that they touch. Women's traditional storytelling as a role have sustained generations of Africans and emboldened them through folk tales, praise songs, and other formats. These stories tell of their greatness as a people and tells of the rich heritage that is theirs. It is time for women to draw on this rich heritage. It is time for African women to ask the question with no name. Remember, Betty Friedan asked in 1963 in a groundbreaking book, The Feminine Mystique. Friedan enabled women to ask what they had all along forbidden themselves to confront. Is this all? Friedan wove together the threads of the many stories that American women had not given themselves the permission to tell one another. These woven stories helped to end the captivity of silence. Women rediscovered the power within themselves to be shapers of their own futures, thereby transcending the then dominant narrative. The birth of the second wave of American feminism took the courage of one woman, Betty Friedan, to mobilize others, to break their silence and demand more of life. African women, as this young woman that I started with, are increasingly asking, is this all that freedom means for us? Is this all that freedom means for our children and our grandchildren? Is this all that freedom means for African men and women? Is this all that our sons and daughters and brothers and husbands and sisters, mothers, aunts sacrifice their lives for in the struggle for liberation? The answers to these questions are the threads of a new narrative that African women are beginning to weave with growing urgency. Black women writers, according to an analyst that I quote, committed to historical intervention and national reinvention, situating themselves as new women of a new Africa, more assertive, more complex than their mothers, but still connected with the past and situated within the family lineage of female storytellers. African women do not have the luxury of weaving exclusionary feminist narratives. Their circumstances demand that they weave an inclusive narrative. Theirs is a narrative that is framed by their womanhood, their humanity, their citizenship, and their intergenerational responsibilities. Inclusive narratives of freedom affirm the truism that one cannot be free in an unfree environment where others are unfree. An inclusive freedom narrative embraces the liberation of all from racism, sexism, ageism, poverty, and the indignity of inequality. So what will it take to redefine freedom? Albert Camus, a 20th century French philosopher, has got wise words in answer to this question. And I quote, "The only way to deal with an unfree world is to be so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion." True freedom challenges the dominant masculinity narrative that has held the world and Africa captive for so long. Masculinity framed by an alpha male narrative celebrates dominance. The elements constituting this dominant masculinity are anchored on power and control. The story goes, real men have money and control over its use. They occupy leadership positions in public life, flaunt their sexual prowess, are hardy and boastful of their intellectual superiority. This dominant masculinity model operates on a competitive winner-takes-all model of power. Such an approach to gender relationships undermines those men who are defined as losers. The alpha male dominance model is sustained by undermining other males. Men who are unable to live up to the expectations of the alpha male narrative suffer from an inferiority complex. The sense of worthlessness drives many men caught up in this undermining system to aggression and substance abuse. The vicious cycle of low self-esteem, feeling disrespected, and unable to communicate inner fears and hopes drives the epidemic of domestic violence and general violence against women and children. How can African women be absolutely free in such an unfree environment? How can they make their very existence an act of rebellion? Such absolute freedom can only come from drawing on the goddesses within the women themselves. The goddess within each woman is the expression of love for the self, love for those close to one, and love for humanity. The exercise of love in this manner unleashes a life force that leads us to a place closest to the source of our very being. African women, through their struggles in an unfree world, are sustained by the all-embracing love as a life force. They draw their energy from narratives framed by Ubuntu, as we say in my hometown. That Ubuntu mirrors universally recognized feminine principles that are set out in a book, if you haven't seen it, called The Athena Doctrine, written by men. These principles are connectedness, humility, candor, patience, empathy, trustworthiness, openness, and flexibility. These principles anchor the values that stand in contradiction to those of the current dominant male model. These transformative values frame the nature of the rebellion we're talking about. That women wage that rebellion in both the private and the public spaces that they occupy to challenge traditional conduct of relationships between men and women. African women engage in such acts of rebellion in an unfree world need to increasingly draw on the strength of fellow women within supportive circles so they can succeed together. Such circles need to operate at the personal and domestic level, at the community level, within institutional settings and professional settings, at work, at places of worship, and in the wider society. Solidarity circles and networks of support for women have to weave within them to go across the boundaries of race, of class, of age, of culture. And this is essential to the development and sustenance of a momentum for transformative change. In my work with my colleagues in my home country in the Eastern Cape, we draw on the strengths and tools of the traditional African conversational circle to drive transformation. These conversational circles enable participating communities of men and women to empower themselves and one another. Lizima, which is what we call them, Lizima means collaboration. Lizima circle, they evoke the egalitarianism, the trust building, and the collaborative principles that traditional African societies used to use to affirm and to work together to tackle common challenges. And in doing so, they protect themselves as well as those who are still to come in future generations. The symbolic power of circles of conversations enable individuals to look inside themselves, to claim their space, find their voice, and link with others. In a circle, there is no chair or somebody who's above somebody else. We are all the same, and we make eye contact. And that's the affirmation that we need. Our experience in this Lizima work confirms the importance of raising the consciousness of individuals of the power of the life force within themselves. They become their own liberators. The life force within them enable them to reach out to others, to sustain acts of rebellion against forces that hold them captive. Women who are more attentive to that inner space where the life source pulsates are the main actors and leaders in Lizima Circle and in the team that is driving this. I was excited earlier this year to discover the work of Jean Shinoda Bolen that resonates with our work in Lizima Circle. Women's Circle form one at a time, writes Jean, who's also a Jungian analyst. Each circle expands the experience of being in one to more women. Each woman in every circle who is changed by it takes this experience into her world of relationships until one fine day, a new circle will form, and it will be the millionth circle. The one that tips the scales and brings us into the post-patriarchal human era. Imagine that. Using experience gleaned from Jean's participation in women's circles since 1985, she argues that these support groups, learning societies, agents of change, can empower members. The author begins by casting a circle: who, what, when, where, and then moves to centering the group with common intention, with energy, compassion, and wisdom. Two important criteria to keep those circles alive: practice equality and make sure that everyone feels safe. Jean concludes with an overview of the importance of rituals and celebration in women's circles. It is in the loving embrace of the circle that more and more women can and are living out their lives of rebellion and changing the world one step at a time. So, what would an Africa with redefined freedom look like? We now know for sure that equality is good for everyone, rich and poor, the authors of The Spirit Level present a persuasive case that more equitable societies are healthier, have longer life expectancies, experience less crime and insecurity, and they reap the benefits of the talents and skills of all their people. And they ascribe this to the trust that develops in a more equal society, which is a marker of how, with greater material equality, you can help to create a more cohesive corporate community to the benefit of everybody. We only need to look at Scandinavia and Japan, even though on the gender side we may have some issues. We also know from recent analysis by Thomas Piketty that wealth accumulation has over the ages largely favored property owners and inheritors of money. Of course, in the 21st century, technology advances has created new billionaires and so on. But at the end of the day, capital begets more capital accumulation. And the majority of the inheritors of wealth are men. What is clear is that societies that have succeeded in overcoming the burden of the triple burden of poverty, unemployment, and inequality have focused on investing in the development of talent in all citizens. Instituting taxation systems that enlarge the common pool and equalize the benefits of development for all is essential. There is a special case to be made for gender equality beyond economics. Gender equality questions lie at the heart of the personal being political. Gendered relationships, while being intensely intimate, are heavily framed and governed by cultural values and reflect how and who exercise power in what spaces and over whom. The exercise of power is a political process with political consequences beyond the space in which the micro-processes play out. The transformation of gender relationships from the African patriarchal toxic alpha male dominance model with its inherent violence is essential to the redefinition of freedom for all. Men, including the alpha male, who lives in terror of losing control and dominance, have to sustain their status by whatever means available, including violence. Such men, both dominator and dominated, cannot be fully whom they have the potential to become. They are too encumbered by the burden of maintaining dominance or surviving being dominated to experience the joy of absolute freedom and enjoyment of relationships of mutual support and nurture that only true freedom can bring. African women as storytellers need to weave an empowering narrative of transformed gender relationships and the opportunities that stem from that in the personal, the professional, and the political spaces within which they operate. True freedom is experienced where power is regarded as an enabler. The more people are enabled to shape their own futures, the more energy would flow in society to unleash talent, creativity, and innovation. Societies that have greater freedom for all, especially for women and girls, do much better than those characterized by domination of men over women and rich people over poor people. The new narrative being woven is putting Ubuntu, the I am because you are, as the governing principle in traditional African societies, is being used as a powerful force that can draw strength. We can draw strength from it. It is an anchor in interpersonal relationships, in community relationships, in which one's humanity is affirmed and confirmed through those relationships. One becomes a better person by being continually conscious of the nurturing and empowering affirmations of reciprocal relationships. Ubuntu resonates with similar principles in other cultures, such as the Japanese and Celtic traditions. The Celtic view is particularly powerful. Just let me quote this. The human body is born complete in one moment. You don't leave your hand inside, it comes out. The human heart is never completely born. It is being birthed in every experience of your life. Everything that happens to you has the potential to deepen you. So, one is only complete as fully human by experiences of life alongside other human beings. African women need solidarity circles and networks to draw on this ongoing birthing process towards becoming more fully human within relationships that are nourished by the life force of love for self and others. The difficult task of not only liberating themselves from the stranglehold of patriarchal systems and the zero-sum game or zero-sum approaches to power is tough enough to do that. But women also have to liberate their men, because without everyone being free, no one can be truly free. And that can only be accomplished as acts of love for humanity. Unfree, fearful men are the main drivers of domestic violence and gender-based violence in our streets, in our villages, the workplace. And for as long as these men remain trapped in this toxic masculinity and patriarchal system, African politics and the development of Africa will be held captive. Cindy Magona, an award-winning author in my country, is also a survivor of 2 failed marriages and the inequities of apartheid, is one of the committed, transformative storytellers. She has decided, she told me the other day, to rewrite history from the lens of a Black African woman in order to, in her words, reshape selves, communities, and societies when all categories of sense-making are open to redefinition. Magona's elegant execution of this commitment finds poignant expression in her novel called Beauty's Gift. If you haven't read it, I would recommend it. This novel transforms an African woman dying of HIV/AIDS into, in Magona's words, a self-governed and self-assured being, ascendant in her ability to freely locate herself in an environment of her own creation. Let me conclude. I would like to end where I started, by making you listen to the voices of women, young women, who are the leaders of today and who are busy redefining freedom. Here's one of them. My mother and my mother and her mother were amazing storytellers. From them, I learned to tell happy stories that build a family community, and nation. I learned that for my life to be beautiful, I have to tell beautiful stories about it. I grew up watching them and drinking from their love, words, and wisdom. I would like to see the upcoming generation of girls receive so much love in their formative years from their mothers, their grandmothers, and carers, so they do not have to seek love and validation elsewhere, but be content with the love they carry within. I would like them not to have invisible ceilings placed in their life experiences and career paths by patriarchal systems, but to be able to flourish to their best ability. Do you see why I am so optimistic about our future?